Hey everyone, Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. It's market update time. We've got loads to bring you this week. We've got mortgage news that you're really going to be happy about. I'm going to tell you the best performing cities of 2020 and bring you some really positive news around the cladding crisis.
Welcome to the Property Podcast, where every Thursday morning property investors come to be informed and inspired. We love these market update episodes, and 2021 is not off to a slow start. Absolutely loads going on at the moment that you need to know about. So we'll be filling you in just a moment. Before we get into it this week, a quick reminder that every week, a few times a week in fact, we offer completely free webinars to help you get started investing in property. So if you are fairly new to the podcast, I know many people are, welcome to you. There's going to be a lot of information for you to piece together around goals and strategy and loads that you need to know, as well as going back and listening to every previous podcast and watching all our YouTube videos, which we hope you do as well. A more convenient starting point might be to come and join one of these free webinars. There is absolutely nothing to buy, there is no sales pitch, and we send you away from it with a package of free resources as well. So there's really not a lot to lose. They're held several times a week at a selection of convenient times. So get yourself registered if you haven't already. The link for you to go to is nice and easy to remember as well. It's just propertyhub.net/action.
So please do take action. That's kind of categorised under a no-brainer. Loads of free information, loads of resources, with no sales pitch. What more can you ask for? Well, I tell you what, a magazine. That's what you could ask for. If you've not subscribed to the Property Hub magazine yet, why not? It's wonderful. It is so good. You will not be disappointed. It's only a £5 delivered, which is an absolute bargain. Comes out every other month. And if you are quick, then you can subscribe in time to get the next issue. You have until the 10th of February, so if you listen to this roughly on time, then you can get in. But if you miss the 10th, don't worry, you'll get another one in a couple of months' time. And you can get access, once you have subscribed, to all the back issues online. For an exchange of £5, you'll get an incredible copy of the magazine and really boost your knowledge and learn so much more about property. You know, the podcast is great. Hopefully you think so anyway. But absorbing your information in different ways is really useful. So check out the mag. Go to propertyhub.net/magazine.
Okay, let's get on to our market update and see what's been happening since we last took a trip through current events. And the answer is a lot. This year is off to a busy start. Let's start, Rob, with house prices because it's always fun. And HomeTrack have brought out their house price index for December. So we're now seeing what the whole of 2020 looked like. And it won't come as a surprise to listeners of this podcast because we covered it before, but you absolutely would not have predicted it back last March. Annual UK house price inflation for 2020, according to HomeTrack, 4.3%, which is a big increase. The rate of growth is highest in Wales and the Northwest. And in terms of cities, Rob, another win for Liverpool.
It is. It's just like the football. Liverpool top of the league. Well, not as we record this anyway, but they were last season. So Liverpool are top with growth of 6.3%, closely followed by Manchester at 6%. Nottingham again, very close, 5.8%. Leeds on 5.8%. Leicester doing good on 5%. And Sheffield, nice to see that up there at 4.7%. Good, strong growth in cities that we've championed over the last year or two as places to go and check out and invest in. So it's pleasing to see them doing so well. And you may remember from a few weeks ago that there was a Rightmove story that said their stats are showing the busiest ever start to January for the property market. So it's looking positive going into 2021. Let's see if this continues, but those cities I'm sure will be in and around the top spots by the end of this year. Which is interesting, Rob, because we've got a story that slightly contradicts that. So one set of data is showing us that things are going great guns for certain cities, but not all cities are created equal, as we know, and some cities are struggling, and particularly when it comes to rents.
Yes, and particularly London. There was a really interesting story in the Financial Times about London rents, which we know are falling. We know it from the stats. I know it anecdotally from the people who I know here. And the reason for that, according to the FT, is that London's population is falling. According to one study, which is just an estimate, so it could be way out, but this estimates that 700,000 foreign-born residents may have left the city since the start of the pandemic. Now, that also coincides with Brexit, so that might be a factor as well. But even if you put that aside, it kind of makes sense that if people aren't working at the moment, rather than living somewhere very expensive, they'd rather go back home for a while and be closer to their families as well. The result of people leaving, most of whom will have been renting, of course, is going to be a drop of rents. And that's what's been happening across London, especially in the most central areas. Now, the interesting thing is at the moment in London, house prices are actually increasing. which is not what you'd expect to happen if rents are falling. You'd expect house prices to follow rents down. So I think, Rob, it's quite a confusing picture, especially in London because it's so big, there are so many micro markets and different things going on, but also to a lesser extent in lots of different city centres. And for me, it comes down to what you believe is going to happen in the medium term. It's absolutely no surprise that people are moving out of city centres at the moment, or have been over the last year, because there's nothing going on in the city and you maybe don't need to be there for work. So, of course, fewer people are going to come in, especially in cities with international students, and more people are going to leave. But is that going to persist over the medium term? That is the question. Because if it is, then you could see a case for why rents would stay low and prices maybe will suffer as well. But if not, and there's going to be a rebound, then now is actually quite a good time to be investing in the city centre, because sentiment is negative and there'll be less competition. So I don't think there's anything too surprising in the figures we're seeing. What you make of that and what you decide to do with that is more to do with your opinion rather than something you could measure.
Yeah, there's another article as well that references Edinburgh is not doing too great at the moment. Edinburgh and London have both seen their rental asking prices drop by over 10%. But those two cities are the most international cities that we have in the UK. So it doesn't surprise me that they're the ones that are hit the hardest. When things eventually return to normal, wherever that is, and travel is allowed again, will they quickly recover or will it stay low? Again, it's hard to predict. I'm sure everyone's got an opinion. And like you said, Rob, based on that opinion, you can make your investment decisions. For me, this next news story is one of the biggest if you're active right now in the property market. It's the big news story that isn't actually this big news, but I'm going to do my very best to make it big news. And that is that the mortgage market is looking really positive. So since COVID, the mortgage market was going in one direction and not a direction property investors wanted. There were less products and rates were going up, and the amount of money you had to put into those properties was more because the loan to values were being reduced. But that seems to have stopped now, and there is a notable trend that this is reversing, with HSBC nationwide cutting their products a couple of weeks back. More recently, over the last week, buy-to-let lenders cutting their rates, loan to values increasing, more mortgage products on the market, up 20+% from December to January. So really, really positive news. This is such good news. The mortgage market is so important to a stable property market, and it was very difficult to transact at some points last year because there were so many limitations put on us. But now, with so many products coming back to the market, and it seems competition is heating up because the property market is doing well, then fantastic. There are better products, which again will only help the market. So really, really good news. If you dig deep on the internet, you'll find all these news stories. Of course, there's a lot going on in the world right now, so that's why it might not have caught your attention. But we're bringing it to your attention now because it's something you need to know. And particularly if you're active or going to be active over the next few months, then this is a win.
It is, and it's particularly interesting at the moment, at this point where the stamp duty deadline is looming. We'll come to that in a second. People are wondering if the boom that we've had recently in terms of house prices and transactions and everything else is going to continue, and this is just the start, or if it's all going to come to a halt later in the year and potentially prices are going to start coming back the other way again. Now, we're going to address that very issue in relation to the property cycle on this podcast in a couple of weeks' time, so listen out for that. But this gives you an indication of what lenders are thinking. Those high loan-to-value products show that they are broadly optimistic about the market, and it also shows that they're keen to lend. Remember last year, they pulled lots of high loan-to-value deals because they just couldn't deal with the business. They didn't have the capacity and they weren't sure whether they wanted to. I mentioned stamp duty in passing. There's loads of talk at the moment about how and whether the stamp duty holiday should be extended. And there's headlines about how many people are going to miss out and have to pay it after all because their transaction's taken too long to go through. Does that mean that it will be extended? I don't know. I remember all this last time when the higher rate for investors came in. There were all these same stories about how people are going to miss out. The industry, of course, is very keen for the stamp duty holiday to be extended because it's helping them out. People who don't think stamp duty should be a thing at all, which is if you have a lot of sympathy with, are using it as a chance to argue that it should never come back. Will it be extended? Well, we'll just have to wait for the budget in a month's time.
Yes, the budget's early March, so we'll have a market update the week after the budget happens. So make sure you have that one in your diaries, or just subscribe and you'll automatically get it. Next up, a massive issue for a lot of property investors who are caught up in this scandal, which is the cladding scandal. We've talked about this on a podcast before, but in short, there are a lot of people suffering right now who own properties with cladding because of Grenfell. Cladding has obviously become an issue, and it's meant that lots of properties now have needed a certain type of survey to take place, but there's been a shortage of a lot of people who could do that survey. And in the meantime, some properties have been deemed unsafe, so therefore Service charges have gone up because they've had to put fire officers in to check out that those said properties are monitored up 24/7, which has just become a real nightmare for the all involved. Fortunately, this week, though, Keir Starmer, the head of the opposition government, has taken hold of this issue and is really championing the cause of these people who are suffering because of the cladding issues. And that can only be seen as good news because now it's getting real attention. It hasn't been, and now it really is. The leader of the opposition is going to make sure that the government discusses this. And if the government has to discuss it, then the government really has to solve it. So I think this is a real glimmer of hope for all those who have been caught out by this. And I really hope that it's sorted out soon, because for a lot of people, they're caught out when they don't need to be. It started off as something that made a lot of sense and was absolutely needed to do, but the way it's been applied and delivered has been far, far from ideal. So hopefully over the next weeks and months, this will all be resolved.
Yeah, and there's a good piece in The Spectator recently, which we'll link to in the show notes as well, about this subject and how it doesn't seem to have been particularly well handled. The sort of default solution that the government is pursuing seems like it's going to end up with the service charges being borne by leaseholders. But then the article makes the point that the Conservative Party sees itself as the party of home ownership, and it really wants to win young voters away from Labour. And it's younger voters who are going to be more likely to be living in apartments and therefore be caught up by this issue. So there is a political motivation for them to help leaseholders out, and so maybe with a bit of political pressure from the other side as well, they will.
Next up, news from Scotland, and the news might not be welcomed by a lot of people, is that Help to Buy is ending, and pretty much ending almost immediately because of lack of funding. For those who may not be aware, Help to Buy is different in Scotland than it is to England, and in Scotland it is stopping. In England, in March, it does change and is watered down quite a bit, and the way it will be delivered will mean that the amount of people who can access it will be reduced, but in Scotland that is reduced to a zero sum. So for those first-time buyers who are hoping to take advantage of the Help to Buy scheme, this is not great news. Not great news for developers as well, nor for the border, because so many of them rely on Help to Buy as a mechanism to get sales done. So it's going to be interesting to see if this has any impact on the Scottish property market and what, if anything, is brought in to replace it. We will see. Of course, we'll keep you updated of any changes. And if you weren't aware that it's changing in England, it might be worth just a quick little Google to see how it's changing. I'm not going to go take you all through the detail now, but basically there's bands of what value properties can take advantage of Help to Buy now, which does rule out a lot of property types in a lot of areas. So probably worth checking on that too if you're interested.
Let's wrap up this market update by going a little bit more big picture. We like a bit of economics, as you know.
Are we talking about GameStop, Rob?
We could talk about that for a long time. We were talking about that for a long time before we got around to recording this episode. But no, less exciting, but actually far more impactful in the long run, which is what the Federal Reserve is thinking in terms of interest rates. Now, yes, this is America, but of course what America does has huge implications for the rest of the world, and it's unlikely that the Bank of England is going to start doing anything radically different. And the story here is that a member of the Federal Reserve, Charles Evans, has said in a speech that he thinks that rates will be likely held near zero until 2024, which will be necessary to give time for inflation to rise to its target of 2%. So zero rates until 2024, at least, is what they're saying at the moment. Why is this relevant? Well, loads of reasons. The short and oversimplistic version is that generally low rates are good for asset prices, including property. So that's supportive of property and other investments doing well. But there's much more to it than that. And what central banks are doing and will continue to do in the future is going to have huge effects, not just on property, but on asset prices in general, on inflation, on your savings, on the whole economy. And I know it's a geeky subject, but I think it's such an interesting time at the moment. And in a couple of weeks on the podcast, we're going to be talking about quantitative easing again. We're going to call it QE instead because it's hard to say, but we are going to be talking about it. And we're going to be doing so because, yes, we've covered it before, but in 2020, it took on a completely new flavour in the UK. And it's something that you need to know about. So I think this particular news story from the Fed is interesting, but that is just one tiny part of a subject that I think is really worth paying attention to, whatever you invest in.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to you being able to listen to that episode. And it's really interesting as well that they don't think inflation will rise to 2024, which I think might not be the case. I think it could rise a lot sooner than that. And we'll talk about that in that episode as well. But which is why predictions are crap, which is up next week's episode. We might refine the title, and it might not come into your feed as that name, but basically that's the premise. And why predictions so far into the future, especially around the economy and property, are a lot of nonsense. So what can you do? Well, it's hard, but we will cover that subject next week and help you understand which predictions you should listen to, which ones you shouldn't, and possibly even how to make your own. So it's time for Hub Extra now, that part of the show where we give you a little bit more, hopefully a lot more this week, because I'm going to try and help you save a lot of money. So over the past week, I was looking at my Sky TV bill, and I wasn't too chuffed with the number. So I had a look at what I was paying for. Now, I'm the type of person that has football as a big priority for me in my TV subscription, so it was quite expensive. But in short, by rejigging my packages, moving providers from Sky to BT, taking on a bit of Sky Now TV, doesn't really matter how I did it, but the point is, with a little bit of research, I took my overall TV bill with sports down from £120 to £35 a month. And while I've cut back a little bit on some of the packages I've got, I've still got all the stuff that's important to me. I've still got all my sports channels. I've got all the main stuff I watch. So a significant saving. Why am I telling you? Well, not to brag, but to tell you to do the same. Martin Lewis has been championing this for a long time. And one of the things he said is challenge yourself to save £1,000 in a day. Because by looking at your TV packages, your energy bills, and any other outgoings that you have that there's competition around to get a better deal, such as mobile, then spend a day or half a day sorting it out. Because if you can spend half a day researching, calling up all these providers and making changes to save £1,000, well, he argues that'll be one of the best paid days that you have this year. And I'm inclined to agree. So I think it's a great use of time. But with life, it's easy just to not focus on it and just get distracted by all different things. But let's face it, with lockdown, you're looking for things to do at the moment, and I did that the weekend gone, and I'm pretty pleased that I did. So do the same. Give yourself that time to look at all your outgoings, all your providers, and get yourself the best deals possible, and challenge yourself to save £1,000 in one day.
Definitely do that. I think it's a great Hub Extra. We've talked about it on the podcast before a long time ago, but I think it's worth saying again that budgeting is fine. Saving a couple of quid here and there where you can is great. But doing what Rob said and spending half a day sitting down and really going over the big things, identifying your biggest costs and seeing what you can do to shave serious amounts off those, that has far more of an impact. And it's a lot more fun as well. It doesn't feel like you're depriving yourself of anything. It's actually satisfying taking that as a challenge. So do that, and let us know how you get on if you have any big wins as well. We love celebrating your wins in property and elsewhere. So that brings us to the end of our February market update. Hope you enjoyed this one, and make sure you keep listening to the podcast for the rest of February, because I think this could just be the strongest month on the podcast yet. We've got some really important topics coming up this month. I'm really excited about these episodes, so make sure you join us every Thursday. But until we see you next for Ask Rob and Rob next Tuesday, enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.